On the morning of the 19th of February, 2026, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was driven to Aylsham Police Station in Norfolk. He walked in as a private citizen. He left 11 hours later, still a private citizen, but now, formally, under investigation. The first member of the British royal family to be arrested in centuries. Thames Valley Police were looking at claims that, during his time as UK trade envoy in 2010, he had shared confidential government documents with Jeffrey Epstein. One email in the U.S. document releases appeared to show Andrew forwarding Epstein a report from his own special advisor about a Southeast Asia visit. Andrew denied it. He denied all of it, every allegation, for the better part of a decade. But here is what makes this story different from every other royal scandal you followed. The arrest wasn't the beginning, and the palace's silence was never about protecting Andrew. The silence was about protecting something much larger, and the institution's own behavior over 6 years tells you exactly what that is. Jeffrey Epstein was arrested on federal sex trafficking charges in July 2019. He was dead by August 10th of that year, officially ruled a suicide in a federal facility, in circumstances that have never fully satisfied the people paid to ask hard questions. His death didn't close the case. It opened a door the palace had spent years welding shut. And what came through that door wasn't just a scandal about a duke's poor judgment and friends. It was a systematic record of an institution making decisions, one by one, that only makes sense if the institution had something to protect beyond its wayward second son. Andrew met Epstein through Ghislaine Maxwell around 1999, though Andrew's own private secretary would later tell journalists the two first met in the early 1990s. Either way, the relationship ran deep enough that by 2006, Epstein, Maxwell, and Harvey Weinstein were guests at Royal Lodge, Andrew's Windsor residence, ahead of Princess Beatrice's 18th birthday celebrations. The timing is the detail that locks into memory. This was 2 months after a United States arrest warrant had already been issued for Epstein on suspicion of the sexual assault of a minor. The palace said nothing. Epstein pleaded guilty in 2008 to 2 state prostitution charges in Florida, served 13 months, registered as a sex offender, and paid restitution to victims identified by the FBI. In December 2010, 2 years after that conviction, Andrew flew to New York and stayed at Epstein's multi-million-dollar Manhattan townhouse. On December 2nd, Andrew attended a gathering at that property with Woody Allen, television journalists Katie Couric and George Stephanopoulos, Chelsea Handler, and Charlie Rose. On December 5th, he and Epstein were photographed walking together in Central Park. On December 6th, Epstein invited a woman to lunch with Andrew. In his November 2019 BBC Newsnight interview, Andrew told Emily Maitlis he had never had any contact with Epstein from that day forward. The day he was referring to was the start of that same trip. Documents obtained later showed Andrew emailed Epstein on Christmas Day 2010, 3 weeks after their Central Park walk, sending what he described as a homemade family message. In February 2011, he wrote again, thanking Epstein for sorting out a problem involving unpaid wages owed to his ex-wife. And on February 28, 2011, 3 months after he told the BBC he had severed all ties with Epstein, Andrew sent an email that read, "We are in this together and will have to rise above it. Otherwise, keep in close touch and we'll play some more soon." Those emails surfaced in October 2025. Until then, the palace had allowed the Newsnight claim, that contact ended in 2010, to stand without correction for 6 years. The Newsnight interview itself is a study in institutional collapse, and the full story of how it happened makes the palace look not like a machine that was deceived, but like a machine that had already lost control of its most radioactive component. Sam McAllister, the BBC producer who spent 13 months negotiating the interview, documented the process in her memoir, scoops. Andrew's private secretary, Amanda Thirsk, was the point of contact throughout. Newsnight believed the interview had been approved by Queen Elizabeth II, but palace insiders speaking to the Sunday Telegraph disputed that, suggesting senior courtiers had not been properly consulted. One of Andrew's official advisors, who opposed the interview, resigned just before it took place. Andrew was reportedly pleased with how it went. He gave Mateless and the production team a tour of Buckingham Palace after recording. The broadcast went out on November 16, 2019, and within 48 hours, it was being described as the worst public relations crisis for the royal family since the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. McAllister would later say the questions were methodical, not sensationalist, and she was right. What detonated the broadcast were Andrew's own answers. The claim that he had spent the night of the alleged encounter at a Pizza Express in Woking with his daughters, and the assertion that a medical condition meant he didn't sweat, which he offered to explain away a photograph showing him apparently sweating at a nightclub. On November 20, 2019, Andrew released a statement saying he was stepping back from public duties. Thirsk was moved sideways out of her role as private secretary. Corporate partners, including Barclays, pulled out of Andrew's Pitchett Palace venture, and Thirsk reportedly received a 5-figure settlement with Buckingham Palace following her termination. Then came the cooperation question, and this is where the palace's public narrative hit its hardest documented contradiction. 4 days after Andrew's step-back statement, his office issued a release describing him as willing to help any appropriate law enforcement agency with their investigations. That sentence was still on the record on January 27, 2020, when Giuffre Berman, then U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, held a press conference and delivered a statement that read, "The Southern District of New York and the FBI have contacted Prince Andrew's attorneys and requested to interview Prince Andrew, and to date, Prince Andrew has provided zero cooperation." Berman said Andrew had publicly offered, indeed in a press release, offered to cooperate with law enforcement, and then failed to do so. Berman didn't stop there. On March 9, 2020, he stated that Andrew had completely shut the door on voluntary cooperation and that his office was considering its options. On June 8, 2020, Berman went further, releasing a formal statement in response to another public claim by Andrew's team of continued willingness to assist. Today, Prince Andrew yet again sought to falsely portray himself to the public as eager and willing to cooperate with an ongoing federal criminal investigation into sex trafficking and related offenses committed by Jeffrey Epstein and his associates, even though the prince hasn't given an interview to federal authorities, has repeatedly declined our request to schedule such an interview, and nearly 4 months ago informed us unequivocally through the very same counsel who issued today's release, that he wouldn't come in for such an interview. 3 separate official statements from a sitting U.S. attorney. 0 official response from Buckingham Palace. David Boies, Virginia Giuffre's attorney, called Andrew's refusal deeply troubling and stated publicly, "Prince Andrew should take most seriously the deeply held belief in this country that no one is above the law." Buckingham Palace's response to that was silence as well. Virginia Giuffre filed her civil lawsuit against Andrew in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York on August 9, 2021. The suit alleged sexual assault and intentional infliction of emotional distress, claiming Andrew had forced sexual encounters with her on 3 occasions in 2001, at Ghislaine Maxwell's London home, at Epstein's Manhattan mansion, and at Epstein's private island, when she was 17 years old. Andrew denied every allegation. While Andrew's legal team worked to have the case dismissed, Ghislaine Maxwell went on trial in New York. The trial ran from late November through December 29, 2021, ending in her conviction on 5 of 6 sex trafficking charges. Andrew was barely mentioned throughout the proceedings. Maxwell chose not to testify in her own defense, which meant she was never cross-examined under oath about her relationship with the Duke of York. Her silence was her right, but the effect was that the person who introduced Andrew to Epstein, who was present at multiple relevant locations, and who Andrew's accusers placed at the center of the trafficking operation, left the courtroom without ever having to answer a single question about him on the record. Her conviction landed on December 29, 2021. The palace was watching. On January 12, 2022, a federal judge denied Andrew's request to dismiss Giuffre's lawsuit in all respects. The following day, January 13, 2022, Buckingham Palace released a formal statement. With the Queen's approval and agreement, the Duke of York's military affiliations and royal patronages have been returned to the Queen. The Duke of York will continue not to undertake any public duties and is defending this case as a private citizen. One day. The timing wasn't coincidental. Royal legal analysts noted at the time that the stripping of Andrew's HRH style and military titles occurred the day after his legal immunity argument collapsed, suggesting the palace had been holding its position contingent on whether Andrew could extract himself through legal means. Once it was clear he couldn't, the institutional protection was withdrawn. According to People magazine's royal sources, the decision was discussed by senior members of the family, meaning Queen Elizabeth, then Prince Charles, and Prince William. A Kensington Palace source confirmed William was fully supportive of Charles's decision. Andrew himself reportedly described his brother's involvement as a betrayal. The settlement came 5 weeks later, on February 15, 2022. Andrew agreed to pay an undisclosed sum, reported by British media at figures in the millions, to Giuffre and to her charities supporting victims' rights. The settlement document stated, "Prince Andrew intends to make a substantial donation to Ms. Giuffre's charity in support of victims' rights. Prince Andrew has never intended to malign Ms. Giuffre's character, and he accepts that she has suffered both as an established victim of abuse and as a result of unfair public attacks." No admission of liability. The critical detail isn't the money, it's the timing. The settlement was reached weeks before a scheduled deposition. Andrew's testimony under oath and the document production that would have accompanied full discovery never happened. Whatever correspondence, travel records, financial transactions, and witness statements would have entered the public record through that process remain private. Former litigators who analyzed the settlement timing noted that settling before discovery is precisely what you do when you can't afford what discovery would surface. That calculation was Andrew's. What the palace knew about what discovery might have surfaced, that calculation was the institution's. Queen Elizabeth II died on September 8, 2022. King Charles III inherited the crown, and the Andrew problem. For 3 years, the arrangement held in uneasy stasis. Andrew remained at Royal Lodge, a 30-room mansion on the Crown Estate near Windsor, on a reported annual rent of 1 peppercorn. He had lost his sovereign grant funding, his military affiliations, and his working royal status. He retained his residence, his title as Duke of York, and his elder daughter's wedding would still carry royal pageantry. The palace declared the matter settled. Then, October 2025 arrived. British newspapers on October 12th published the full text of the February 28, 2011 email, "We are in this together," alongside documentation showing Andrew had maintained contact with Epstein and Maxwell well into 2011. The same month, Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir, Nobody's Girl, was published, containing detailed accounts of her alleged encounters with Andrew. Giuffre had died by suicide on April 25, 2025, aged 41. Her words were now speaking from beyond that death, and the palace had no mechanism to contain them. On October 30, 2025, Buckingham Palace released a new statement. King Charles had initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and honors of his younger brother. Prince Andrew will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. The statement specified that the censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him, and confirmed that formal notice had been served for Andrew to vacate Royal Lodge. A palace source confirmed Charles had the support of the wider family, including William. 2 rounds of title stripping, 3 years apart, each one reactive, each one timed to fresh public exposure rather than a principled institutional reckoning. Then, in February 2026, came the U.S. document releases that contained the email appearing to show Andrew forwarding a confidential government report to Epstein during his 2010 trade envoy trip through Southeast Asia. Thames Valley Police opened an inquiry. On the 19th of February 2026, Andrew's 66th birthday, they arrested him. 11 hours later, he was released under investigation, driven away from Aylsham Police Station, neither charged nor exonerated. The language of under investigation is specific in British law. It means police have gathered sufficient evidence to justify an arrest, but haven't yet determined whether to recommend prosecution. It means the file stays open. Ghislaine Maxwell remains in a United States federal prison, serving a 20-year sentence. She has never given full testimony about the highest-profile individuals connected to Epstein's operation. The FBI's investigation into the wider Epstein network has never been formally declared closed. The depositions that would have been taken in Giuffre's civil case against Andrew, the documents, the emails, the travel records, were sealed inside a settlement that explicitly avoided any admission of wrongdoing. What the palace did between November 2019 and October 2025 wasn't a cover-up in the sense of a conspiracy with locked rooms and burned files. It was something both simpler and more revealing. A series of institutional decisions, each made at the precise moment external pressure made the previous position untenable. Andrew stepped back the day after the Newsnight disaster proved uncontainable. His titles were stripped the day after his legal immunity failed. The settlement landed weeks before his deposition. The second round of title stripping followed the October 2025 document releases by 18 days. Every action was reactive, calibrated, and designed to absorb the immediate crisis rather than answer it. The question the palace never answered, not once, not in any official statement across 6 years, is what it knew and when. Not about Andrew's activities, which are matters for courts to adjudicate. About its own knowledge. When did senior officials understand the relationship with Epstein had crossed from embarrassing into something more serious? Who advised Andrew to maintain contact after the 2008 conviction? Who knew about the 2011 emails before they became public in October 2025? Who decided across multiple years that a peppercorn rent on a 30-room Windsor mansion was an appropriate arrangement for a man the institution had publicly described as defending himself as a private citizen? The palace's answer to those questions is the same as it has always been. Silence. Carefully worded statements. Dignity of process. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is currently a private individual, living under investigation, stripped of every title his mother gave him at birth, evicted from the home he occupied for decades, no longer welcome at the annual Sandringham Christmas gathering that has defined the royal calendar for generations. His brother and his nephew built the wall around him brick by brick, and the public was told each new brick was the last one. The chapter isn't closed. The palace simply stopped writing publicly. And the difference between those two things is exactly what this series exists to examine. Subscribe to Palace Confidential for more on the stories the institution would prefer you stopped asking about.